time. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'd like to welcome everybody to June's Innovation Tuesday. The topic is how to start podcasting, which I think people are getting a crash course at least on how to have virtual meetings. So this is opportune time to have this presentation. So I'd like to welcome, like I said, everybody here. For those of you who aren't familiar with our Innovation Tuesdays, the second Tuesday of every month, we host it. We used to always do it in person out at NIU Rockford Convention Center. And after this is all over with the COVID stuff, we hope to get back to that as well as doing it virtually. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Reinhardt Law Patent Attorneys, a national organization that fits in very well with everything that we do, helping people with their products. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. Introduce our speaker, Pat Helmer, who is the founder of Habanero Media, a podcast agency that helps B2B companies boost their brand, authority, influence, and trust to grow revenue. Is business development consultant and technology startup coach. He is the author of Selling with Confidence, Sales Systems, and host of award-winning Sales Babble podcasts. Pat started his career as a software engineer at Bell Labs and Lucent, moving on to work with tech startups. So, Pat, I'll let you go ahead and start off.
That's about right. Thanks, Mike. What I like to do is start with a story about how I kind of got it. 7 years ago, I was driving on I-44 in between St. Louis and Tulsa. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's kind of just above the Missouri Ozarks. You kind of go up and down the hills a lot, and the radio doesn't work so great sometimes. And I was listening to a podcast, and in those days, used to download them on an iPod. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It had a big wheel and it had earbuds, and you had to kind of jerry rig it to play it out of the radio. I had like this device plugged into it was crazy. And I couldn't find a podcast that I really loved on selling. A lot of them kind of assumed that you were a super slick seller. You'd been selling, you'd been running a lemonade stand since you was 4 years old. That guy wasn't me. As Mike said, my degrees are in computer science. I wrote software. I was a sales manager for many years, but I kind of fell into selling from being able to promote technologies and why would a technology make a lot of sense, and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. And as an engineer, it's hard to understand this, but once you talk to customers, it becomes pretty clear that oftentimes we weren't making what people wanted. So I decided to start blogging, and I had hit this weird blog called The Tao Te Ching of Sales. It was kind of a Taoist look on selling, like water is soft, but it can cut through the hardest of rock with time. And that's kind of how great sales is. And I believe in the power of non-pushy sales. So we came up with this idea, my wife and I, of starting a podcast, because I was a big podcast listener, and I called it Sales Babble. Went and found the domain about it's going on 7 years ago, I guess. And we started a podcast called Sales Babble, Selling Secrets for Non-Sellers, non-pushy selling, interviewed lots and lots of people. I just did episode 324 today. So they've been coming out every week, like clockwork. The reason I'm telling you this story is that I want you to know that these slides that I'm going to show you guys come from all my years of podcasting, and it comes from working with my clients. I help companies start podcasts to grow revenue. So this is like real stuff about that really works. And I'm going to talk about problems too that people face and how to overcome them. I'm totally biased on podcasts. I believe podcasts are, the best thing to come to content marketing since the invention of the blog. So with that said, I'm ready to move on. I think I can share my screen. Host has disabled the participant from screen sharing. Rob, could you give me access, please? Nope, not yet.
I'm working on it. I've just got to try and work out where it is.
I think we're all agreeing you're going too slow here, right? We should we don't need to put pressure on you. This is totally too slow. But I don't mean to put pressure on you. Woohoo!
Okay, try it now.
Yeah. Are you guys seeing it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Went on my other screen. Okay. All right. Podcasting to market your business, how to get started and boost your brand, authority, influence, and trust. That is exactly right. Do I sound okay?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. What's a podcast? On-demand online radio show. Probably everybody here has heard of what a podcast is. Interestingly enough, podcasts have gotten pretty hot the last year or two, but they've been around for like 15, 16 years, a long, long time. This I already said. This I already said. This I already said. Today, what I want to talk about is why you should have a podcast, what a B2B podcast is, how to use a podcast for content marketing, what kind of recording equipment and tools you could use, what is the process for producing and publishing a podcast, and how to promote it and you and your business. As I was saying, podcasts have been around a long time. Roughly, when this was done last fall, Edison Research said there were 70 million monthly podcast listeners. That's a lot in the whole world. 41% of the people have listened to a podcast, at least one episode, someplace, somewhere within the last year. 43% of the listening is on Spotify and Pandora, which is just amazing. Spotify just about 2 years ago had bought a podcasting company. They were actually shocked to find in Germany people were uploading podcasts into the system, and that was it. Right now, this said music is the number one topic, but I think that's actually changed. Right now, news is the number one topic given the COVID-19 virus. I'd seen that recently, said I should probably update that. And 54% of the listeners have been said that if they hear a product or a service promoted on a podcast, they are likely to purchase that brand that was mentioned. The trust of the podcast gets passed on to the product. What's unique about podcasts from all the other things that's out there is that when people listen to podcasts, they're totally focused on it. Now, they can multitask. You can do two things at once. You can go for a walk or drive a car, mow the lawn, go for a run. There's lots of things you can do, housework, while listening to a podcast, being totally focused on it and doing the second thing. That's not clear with other things. You can't do that if you're reading a blog. You can't do that if you're watching a YouTube video. Podcasts are unique in that. It's also very easy to, in some of these other things, to get distracted and click off. Commonly, people start a podcast, they listen to it all the way through. There's also less bias and less judging in a podcast. Because they're not seeing you or they're not seeing your grammar, they might say, I don't like his hair, which is actually looking better than it was. They think I'm too old. There's lots of things people judge. But when you're just hearing a voice, you can make that person be anybody that you want. It actually makes the content that you are creating more evergreen. Why do people listen? They're lifelong learners. It's what I call infotainment. A lot of great podcasts are informative, but they're entertaining all at the same time. Podcasts are unique, and you can go very, very narrow into a topic in a way that you couldn't in any other way. Like I said, it's great for doing two things at once: driving, workouts, introspection. Here's podcasts that are very, very famous right now. These are the top podcasts. Joe Rogan's Experience Show, New York Times The Daily, Serial, Office Ladies, Rabbit Hole. I just finished Rabbit Hole. Wild. What a wild podcast. It's all about internet. It's all about the dark web. Super duper interesting. I like Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History, Gary Vaynerchuk's marketing podcast, Seth Godin's Akimbo podcast, Tropical MBA, Golf Smarter, which is actually the podcast that my podcast, Sales Babble, is kind of based on. The way he forms and the way he interviews people, it's pretty fun. And then Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. In fact, he just came out with it. His don't come out very often. One came out on Wednesday, and he's slowly explaining the World War II battle in the Pacific against Japan. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Lots of types of podcasts. A lot of podcasts, people get on there and they teach. I have a client who teaches people how to run a hospitality business through Airbnb, and he teaches people how to do it. His episodes are 15 minutes to 30 minutes, and he walks through a topic and walks it through step by step, does a great job. Some people use it for a journal. Actually, I do paper journaling. There's a lot of people just want to get on there and just talk about their lives, like the Kardashians. Might do it. A lot of interviews are interview-based. A lot of podcasts are interview-based, where two people get on, one person asks the other person a question. I have two clients, two ladies, who are in the caregiving business, and they ask each other questions about, powers of attorney and how to deal with insurance and how to deal with nursing homes. It's pretty interesting stuff. And then some of the most entertaining podcasts, the ones that are loved the most, there's a lot of drama ones and storytelling ones, and they're almost like audiobooks, but they're often dramatized. So there's lots of different kinds of podcasts. What I'm talking about here today are business podcasts. Although a lot of what I'm going to talk about is applicable to those podcasts, like some of the mechanics of it. I'm really all about, I believe a podcast is a great way to boost your business. It grows your brand. Brand is what makes you unique and stand out from all the competition. It helps you create authority. You become a super duper expert in something, and people look up to and take the advice of authority. Through a podcast, you can actually influence an industry by having the right kind of people maybe on a podcast. You can actually push things in a set direction. And from all of that, you can grow trust. Trust is the thing it's a commodity we're very short of these days in the world. There isn't a lot of trust. There's a lot of choice, so people kind of get stuck with the paradox of choice. But if they hear your voice and they hear you're authentic, people will trust you. And when the opportunity comes for you, when you ask that, would you be interested in a product or service that I sell, people are very open, far more open to purchase something from you. When you build a business podcast, your ideal client should be your ideal audience. Your audience should be highly targeted. It should have a limited set of listeners. The kind of podcasts that I'm talking about here are not podcasts that a huge number of people, it's not going to be Joe Rogan. It's about people in a very, very narrow industry. Like my buddy, as I mentioned, he has a podcast that's only for people in the Airbnb business who want to run hospitality. You want to run the perfect Airbnb so it's always booked, like his are, despite the COVID-19. All his are completely booked. It's content to motivate the audience to become actually prospect leads. We want to take a marketing and a sales point of view. The idea is that those leads might become qualified prospects, and eventually they might become loyal clients or customers someday. Gary Vaynerchuk is a profane but honest marketing guru. I like him a lot. He's fun and he's motivated, and he says, quote, "Just remember, audio and voice are by far the most natural interface for humans to interact. We like to speak and listen. It is the medium of the moment. Every business needs a podcast." It's something that he really promotes all the time. Got to have a podcast. Got to have a podcast. Move on. Seth Godin, who's unbelievable marketing expert. I don't know if you know this guy. He has the Akimbo podcast. He believes that podcasting is the new blogging. Right now, blogging takes a lot of work to write 1,000 words. In fact, people pay people to write blogs. But in podcasting, we're actually hearing your authentic voice. And if done right, and it's not as hard as it may sound, we can get people to sound very comfortable in front of a microphone and just share their business in ways just like they would if they were talking to buyers and customers. So these are the problems that we're looking to try to solve. Do you find it hard to create brand promoting content? Do you find it hard finding time to create content? Are you sure that your buyers are reading the content that you're creating? All those tweets and Facebook posts and LinkedIn posts, Instagram photos. Are you seen as a thought leader or an authority? Do your existing clients think of you as the definitive authority? Do your peers out there within the industry, if you go to a conference, do people see you as a visionary? And are you recognized, if you get an awards by professional organizations, that you are the de facto expert? That the bottom line that we're looking for is that we want people to trust in you completely, because with that trust, a lot of great business can happen. Podcasting is content marketing, and not to get too deep into it, that's what content marketing is all about. But to quote Seth Godin, the only real marketing anymore is content marketing. It's all about creating and spreading relevant, consistent content, in this case, podcast episodes, that attracts new customers and retains your existing clients. It allows you to stand out, to differentiate, to be an authority, and to get customers, your listeners, to drive profitable action. Get them to take action and buy your stuff. All of this, to a certain degree, is to make you stand out, is about brand. It's to find out a way to stand out in a field of monochrome Holsteins, to quote Seth Godin. Driving down the road, going down Cherry Valley Road between DeKalb and Rockford, right? And you look off and you see lots of cows, but there's one cow there that's purple. What's that? What's that purple cow? That's the one everybody's going to look at. That's what you want to be. You want to be a purple cow. He's got a whole book written on this. I won't go any deeper into it than that. Brand builds trust. The power of being a brand is that your name speaks for itself. When people think sales babble, they think Pat Helmers. When people think Pat Helmers, they think sales babble. I am inextricably tied. I'm in the process of taking that brand with sales babble and glomming it onto Habanero Media. So when people think of Habanero Media, they think of sales babble, they think of me. That's the process that we're trying to do. To quote Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey. I actually got to see him speak once at Aurora University. It's pretty cool. Trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. That's what we want to do here. We want to build trust. And I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but that's the best way to get this to really to sink in. Podcasting means authority. I got a prospective client, James Voigt. James is actually an attorney. He's just written a book, and he wants to start a podcast because, and I'm quoting him here, I can only launch that book once, but I can launch a podcast with each new episode. You always have, what's great about an episode is it always is a reason for you to do a post on Facebook, do a post on LinkedIn, do a tweet on Twitter, do a photograph on Instagram, and I don't have anybody doing this, but you could also do a little video on TikTok, all about promoting a podcast. Let's talk about some of the benefits. A podcast is great if you want to launch something new, like a whole business or a new product or an idea. And the way we could possibly do that is you could interview thought leaders and you can actually build partners with the people that you interview. And here's a clever thing to do. You can actually get clients from interviewing them. Another thing that's awesome about podcasts is they can generate authentic testimonials from your existing clients, referrals, and generate awareness for other people so that they might become clients or customers sometime. And the other thing that's really key about podcasts is if it's done right, you can inspire people to take action. Let's walk through each of these in a little bit of detail. Attract new clients. Each episode has a blog post associated with it. And those blog posts can be SEO'd on the website to drive people to it. Those posts can then be shared on social media every time you do one. And it actually allow the podcast apps that people listen to their podcast on their phone, you can actually get them to drive traffic to your website. Because once you get them to your website, then you can get them on an email list. Once you get an email list, then you can do a drip campaign to start slowly marketing and get them to know you otherwise. Posts attract prospects with optimized search. That's one way you can get new business from a podcast. Another thing you can do is and I briefly mentioned this before, is you can actually interview people who you think might be great prospective clients. I've got a prospect, he's actually put this on hold because he's a recruiter and all hiring's been frozen, but he wants to invite prospects onto his podcast, interview them, and then at the end of the interview, thank them, and then they're just naturally going to ask you about you, and next thing you know, you're sharing stuff about you and how you might be able to help them. I've done this myself multiple times on Sales Babble. I got a brand new sponsor right now on Sales Babble. It's a company called Sharetivity. How did I get this sponsor? I actually interviewed the founder. And then I asked the founder, I go, do you ever think about sponsoring a podcast? It was just that simple. And he liked me, and now he's a sponsor. So that's how that happens. Next, client retention. Sometimes in a client-based business, in a B2B business, the only time people talk to you is when things are broke. They call customer support and they complain. This is a great way for you to put out content so to kind of keep them abreast of what's going on in the business. Let's say you're an IT MSP company. You could be doing a podcast on maybe something with cybersecurity or something, and your existing clients can listen to that, and you could say, these are steps you need to take to mitigate risk. And oh, by the way, we got this hot new thing that you might be interested in. If you're interested, give us a call. And then out of the blue, your clients will just call you up, and now you can upsell them. Another thing that's cool about this is that you can get your existing clients, interview them, create content for them talking about their origin story that then they could share to the world. And that would allow you to get truly authentic testimonials where they could really, and you could ask them, like, what was the problem that you had that you were before you met us? Why did you choose us? What's it been like working with us since we became clients? And what would you tell other people if they we're thinking about using us as a vendor. And that's a very, very powerful testimonial. And it's in their words. And people are happy to do this stuff. People love being on podcasts. I have to beat off people. Every day, someone's reaching out to me on the email asking to be on my podcast. I got to beat people off, which is pretty fun. Authentic testimonials. I already said this, right? But it also gives you an opportunity to, when you're speaking with your existing clients, to say, do you have any referrals for me? Could you share this episode with friends of yours and see if they might be interested in learning more about us? Referrals are the best way, the easiest way to grow new clients. People trust their friends. Their friends say these guys are good to go, that will transfer to you, to your business. Oh, these slides are so clever. I'm already saying what I'm on here. Existing clients share episodes with friends. Friends become prospective clients. Episodes are used for marketing and sales content. That's the thing too. If you really highlight your clients really well, you get them to tell their story and why they're the go-to choice for whatever industry they're in, they will then share this episode with their customers over and over again because it's free content for them. Everybody loves that. That's a win-win. Podcasts build trust. Your brand sticks out from the competition. You're a leader, an inspiration, and you're the right choice. When you're creating content, the content is actually more important than the sound. If it's really good stuff, people will suffer through bad sound to listen to it. But after a few episodes, it can really start to grate on the ears. So it's really important to make your podcast sound as good as possible. Luckily, there's been a lot of advances in technology where you can get a microphone, and there's services, and I'm going to walk through these in a little bit, that can create a pretty high quality recording. That really makes a difference. Good sound makes a difference. And the thing too here is like, yeah, this is a good point here. You don't need a sound studio to do this. I just want to, for example, just to get started in podcasting, all you really need is a computer. I have a little laptop. You probably already own a computer. I'm guessing that because you're watching me on Zoom here. Maybe you're watching on your phone. That's possible. An ATR 2100 microphone like this one, like right here. They've actually gone up in price since the lockdown. They're like $90 to $100 now. They used to be like $70. What's cool about them is they actually have a USB plug in the back that can plug directly into your computer. They also have an XLR one, which is like what recording studios use and bands use. So you can use it for multiple things. And then there's a piece of software called Zencaster. So you can do remote recording, which is pretty popular these days, given that we can't meet in my studios anymore. And that's free. Zencaster's free. You can do 2 people for free. This is my recording studio. I won't go through it in too long a detail. I've got some videos on YouTube if you're really interested in seeing a 10-minute demo on this. But you can see I've got like a pop filter there. That's at that circle on the left. I've got the microphones behind it. That's the pop filter stops the plosive sounds, the p sounds. I don't know if that's happening here today. You can see I got a little mixer board in the back. That's great for my studio because I can plug another microphone in, have people here in my studio, and we can record each other and look at each other just like in radio. I got a device off that mixer that turns an analog signal into a digital and plugs into the USB. It's pretty useful. You can see also too, the microphone is on a boom, so that when I beat my desk, it dampens the sound and it doesn't make a whole lot of noise. And then you commonly use headphones when you're editing, because it allows you to hear every tick and little bitty noise that might show up if you're listening with headphones. People listen to a podcast with headphones or in their car on Bluetooth. But you don't need a studio. You could do something as simple as opening up a closet that's filled with clothing, putting your microphone in front of the closet and talking into the clothing. That will dampen the sound. Small rooms are better. Rooms that are cluttered and messy sound better. Rooms with small ceilings sound better. The worst is a big, empty room with lots of hard surfaces. Because what that does is it allows the sound to reverberate through there. What you want to do is have lots of weird angles, which is what clothing in this case does. You'd be surprised how easy you can hear fans in your computer. Like, in order to keep my computer cool during the summer like this, I have it raised up so that air blows underneath it. And even though I don't have a hard drive in this, it doesn't take much to heat up a computer after a while. You can actually hear that fan. You can hear the fans of HVAC. This here is the software that I use called Zencastr. I mostly record people. Sales Babble is an interview-based podcast. I interview people all over the world. South Africa, Australia, China, Thailand, England, and then all over the United States and Canada. And it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like Zoom, but no audio, but no video. And when you create a recording, it actually makes the recording and stores it on the computer of each of the people being interviewed. When you're listening to each other, you may hear noise from the voice over IP call, but that's not what's being recorded. High quality files being created on each side. At the end of the recording, the file of all the people who are being interviewed, and you can do more than two people if you want. All those files get sent to the person who started it and are downloaded into their computer. So it's a great way to have a very high quality sound. In fact, and each one is just the track for that person that is speaking. So that allows you, if you bring all those tracks together into editing software, you can actually cut people out, noises and ticks and things that they're making. It makes it very easy to make a high quality recording. To get even simpler, I have this little PM20S lavalier microphone. You can see there's two little microphones on here. They clip on your lapel. That's why they're called lavaliers. It's a French term. And I can actually plug that into your phone. It's got one of those 3.25 millimeters connectors. And if you got an iPhone, there's a little dongle doodad that you plug that into, and then you plug that into your phone. What's great about just recording on your phone is they have pretty strong batteries if it's all charged up. If you find a quiet spot, and I've done this, you find a corner in some place, you get two people close together. I don't know what this means with COVID-19 though. You're not supposed to get too close. But when all this is done, this is what this little device can do, and it can make a recording right there on the phone. This is the software that I use on the phone, Boss Jock Jr., where you can actually put the sound into. You can actually create a file of the recording, but you can see these colored boxes up here. That could even be intro and outro music. You could actually edit the whole kit and caboodle on here. I don't do that. It is kind of clever, but if you wanted to get really simple without a computer, you could actually produce a podcast and submit it to the internet from this one piece of software. Pretty interesting. You can bring the volume up and bring the volume down, have the music swell up, have the music swell down, you can have sound effects. It's kind of clever. I just use it for recording personally. This is the software that I use for editings. And that we use. Oh, I misspelled that. There's 2 I's in Audacity. There's actually only 1 I in Audacity. What you do is you bring these MP3 files. That's what the file format is that comes in, and you bring it into this piece of software, which is free. And it works extremely well. I've been using it for many years. And then you can add music and maybe a little introduction. That's called an intro, and maybe you have a call to action at the end. That's called an outro. And what you do is when you edit the whole thing, you then export it into one file, one MP3 file. That file then, was there a question?
Yeah, Pat, there's a question from Chris. Do you have a budget estimate for someone to start podcasting as an amateur who is well prepared as an MS of equipment and Microsoft, not including a laptop? Is that a fair question?
No, that's a good question. All you really need's a USB microphone, a $25, $30 headset, earphones, and everything else is pretty much free. I'm going to talk about, you're going to need a media server, but that's not very expensive. For a couple $100, you could probably do a lot. You could probably do a lot. I didn't explain this. I didn't explain in this talk, but I also have a little, you guys can see me still. I got this bag, and in it, it's got a little bitty mixer. It's got 2 ATR 2100 microphones. It's got 2 headphones. So you could go to a coffee shop, and despite the fact that the espresso machine's making a lot of noise, you can actually do a nice recording on the fly, and it only fits in this. And this whole thing is probably $200-300, maybe not even that. But you could get even less. Like the slide I had, get an ATR 2100 for $100. You can get headphones for $25, and you can be a podcaster. Yep. Cover art here.
Thanks.
Yep. Every file, every MP3 file's got to have art associated with it. When you bring up your app that you listen to, like the big ones, Apple or Spotify or Google Play or Stitcher or Player FM, one of those, the artwork that comes up in there, you got to have artwork so it shows up. So it's kind of like a cover. It's got to be a 1300 by 1300 square. It shouldn't be any bigger than 230 kilobytes. It says 260, but it's really 230 last I read. And there's a tool called Canva that can make these, you can pull in your own photos and whatnot, and it's free. Canva's free. Then you need to add tags to the file. There's a free tool called MP3 Tag that does this. And there's things on there like who is the author of the podcast, what is the name of the podcast, what is the title of this episode, what type of MP3 file it is. It is a podcast file, what year it came out, what episode it is, and then there's a place where you can put in there show notes and things like that. So then you got to put all that on there, and then you upload it into a media server. This is a cloud-based set of servers that are designed to stream sound quickly to all of the podcast apps in the world. The file actually sits in there on their servers, and you share a URL with them. With the upside of having a media server do this versus just hosting it on your website or something like that, is that if a whole bunch of people were to quickly download it, and listen to it, they can keep up with that. Plus, they do double, triple backups on all the files, so they never get lost. Some of them, actually, I only use Libsyn is the company that I use. They actually give you a free little website, a web page that has all your podcast episodes on there, and you can share that with friends. You don't have to build a website if you don't want to. And these people charge $5 a month. They don't charge very much. It's enough to do 2-3 episodes in a month. This here is how these all get shared to the world. So you have a file, that's the lady up at the top. She gives it to Libsyn, which is the green thing, box up there. And then they share it in an RSS feed that goes to Spotify here, or what I got, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Castbox, Stitcher, all of those. There's a whole bunch of them and more. Pandora. And what they do is they just share this RSS feed with them. Those companies, so like Apple Podcasts, who's the big guy out there, they're just constantly looking at that RSS feed. They come back to it every few minutes and say, has it changed? Has it changed? Has it changed? And when they see that the RSS feed has changed, they then they grab the artwork and the content that we put in those tags that we spoke about earlier. Those all then get brought up into Apple. And then if somebody was to pull up your podcast on their phone, then all of a sudden they'd see, oh, look, there's a new podcast from you. And then you click play, and it actually, Apple really doesn't have the file. They don't play it. They actually pass through the streaming from Libsyn to the listener.
There's another question. Is Libsyn like Simplecast?
I don't know Simplecast. I don't know. There's people out there, I don't know Simplecast, but I know a lot of people use Anchor because it's free. But there's problems with these free ones. If you ever wanted to move your podcast, if you ever wanted to stop people from putting ads on that you don't want on it, you lose a lot of control when you give it away for free. Libsyn's so cheap, it allows you to make sure that only your brand is being promoted here, which is the whole point of what this talk's about. We're doing these podcasts to boost your business, not to have an ad for a Chevy dealer on there. And that's what can happen with a free, with a free thing. You all have seen YouTube videos, right? On, like right now I'm watching YouTube videos on gardening, right? So how to grow peppers. I got a bunch of peppers I'm growing this year. Next thing pops up, an ad for something that has nothing to do with peppers. It has nothing to do with that company. Some book that they're selling. So that's how. That's what I know about that. And I just think I believe everything I just said a little bit ago is on this slide. I don't need to repeat myself. You don't need to hear that. Yeah. Another cool thing that comes from these media servers is they can collect metrics for you. They can tell you how many downloads that you have. Now, a download is if someone has taken the file and downloaded it to their phone, it gets counted, even if they never listen to it, which kind of makes the metrics wonky back in the old days of iPods. Because that's back, you remember, that's how it used to work. You used to go on your computer, and then you would, and then you use the iTunes software, which was awful, to take that downloaded MP3 file and stick it on your iPod. That's not mostly what most people do anymore. Now people have enough data on their phone, they just stream it directly through. What this counts is how many times it's been streamed. But they call them downloads. As I mentioned, the trouble with these metrics is it doesn't tell you like how long someone listened to it. It might tell you what country it came from. But it's not like, you think about like automated email autoresponders, they can tell you if people have clicked on links. It can tell you maybe what country, it can tell you stuff that right now, metrics is being, there are no real standardized metrics in podcasting right now. And there's a consortium of people, of podcasters that are trying to come up with metrics. But I was at a conference last summer and it sounds like they were nowhere near ready to ever roll them out. So the most we can find out is that if people download it or not. But to a certain degree, it really doesn't matter in what we're talking about here tonight. We're talking about a hyper local podcast that's in a very narrow industry, your industry, only your customers, your audience, very small. It's about quality, not quantity. You're not trying to be Joe Rogan. That's not what you're trying to do. Instead, what you're trying to do is get the right kind of person to listen to your podcast, take action, and buy your stuff. So how do you market a podcast? This is an easy answer. The same way you do any kind of content marketing, just like if you had a blog, or if you had a YouTube video that you're promoting, or you were doing a webinar, you would do you could do SEO content marketing. Like the show notes is like a blog post that goes with the show that talks about all the links that you mentioned, the guests that maybe you had, or you know, kind of an outline of what you talked about. Those could be search engine optimized so that when people just randomly started looking for information in Google, in search, your podcast episode comes up and then they jump on that. And that's something I do every single episode that I have in Sales Babble is been SEO'd. It's so that people will find it on the web, go to my website, listen to the podcast, and then get them to subscribe. Of course, there's also social media. Like today, when my episode came out, I did a post on Facebook, I did a tweet, I did a LinkedIn post, I tagged my guests, and then that shows up in everybody's feed. And I personally have like 3,500 people connected to watch on my LinkedIn feed. Also got to send an email out every Tuesday telling people who've signed up, I got a new episode out, you know, click here, listen to it. You know, I told people, actually, come to this. I don't know if anybody did. Come to this if you want to learn about podcasts. I'm talking NIU today. And then of course, networking. Podcasting is truly a differentiator. Each episode's a new launch. Emails sent to announce the episode, each blog post, auto tweets. Yeah, just repeating myself here. Each episode has a call to action. And that's what's really important, because that's how you get people to take action. Once they've listened to you talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes or half an hour, some people do podcasts even longer. At the end, you would ask them to do something for you. Download some lead magnet I have, download some checklist I have, reach out to my guest and read their book. That's how you want to leverage the value of that episode. Unlike other content marketing, word of mouth is the best way that podcasts grow. You could do TV ads and buy Facebook ads, and you could social media to death, getting people to follow your episode. And that works to a certain degree. But what really works, and if you think about all the podcasts that you listen to, it's probably because somebody mentioned to you, you should listen to this podcast. Some friend told you, listen to this podcast. Or you were listening to a podcast and the podcast said, you should listen to this podcast. That's why it's really important to make friends with other podcasters, to become guests on their podcast, because when you become guests on their podcast, you get the opportunity to turn their audience into your audience. one of the call to actions I always have on my podcast is I'll ask the listeners, I'll say, did you enjoy this podcast? Did you find value in this podcast? If so, share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues. Word of mouth really makes a difference. That's something I say all the time because it's true. So then that begs the question of, well, if I get to know other podcasters, how do I get on another podcast? So this is something you might want to do before you actually start a podcast, is see if you can get on somebody else's podcast. Buy one of those microphones, those ATR 2100s that I mentioned, and then grow your authority by getting interviewed. Find people, podcasts, that are like-minded to you, who think the same way that you do, and then reach out to them with an email or a LinkedIn email message. Or what would stick out is if you cold call them on the phone. That sticks out with me. I get emailed a lot, people trying to be on my podcast. So many emails that it's hard for me to even keep up with them. But if someone reached out to me on LinkedIn, that's not so often. I'm more likely to look at it. And if someone was to call me up, which is not that hard to find my phone number, and say, Pat, I was listening to your podcast. I love what you're trying to do. I think that way. I think I can add value to your audience. This is what I would talk about. There's a high likelihood I'd say, you sound awesome. I'd love to have you on my podcast. It's just that easy to get on a podcast. And then once you get on a podcast, people might say, you always get an opportunity somewhere during the podcast. They will say, well, how can people connect with you, find you? Where do you recommend they go? And you would say, I would love them to listen to my podcast. Podcasters sometimes have big egos. Often they like to talk a lot. Just be a good guest. And if they want to pontificate about their stuff, that's okay. When you get a chance to talk. But like I said, it's always important to have a call to action. Have some kind of lead magnet, something that they can download. So you could say that, go to my website, put in your put in this email, you will get this free thing, and that'll automatically subscribe you to my podcast. A lot of people start podcasts and fade away. Most podcasts don't go past 10 episodes because podcasting can be a lot of work for some people. What Habanero Media does is we try to do all the work for the people. All they have to do is get behind the microphone, and we do all the rest. But even just to get behind the microphone, it's important that you know your why, kind of a Simon Sinek thing, right? Before you get started. That way that you can continue to have the power and the energy to keep promoting it. And that's my last slide. Here's my call to action. If you go on to Habanero Media, that's habaneromedia.net, you can download Why Your Business Needs a Podcast, How to Start a B2B Podcast. I got a master class in there. I got a bunch of blog posts on there. I just did a blog post today on how to pick a microphone. Yeah, that's my call to action. So, questions? Any questions? Looks like people are dropping off already.
There's a question from Kim. Do you have a checklist for beginners to help them set up a new podcast system, or steps to complete and post individual podcasts?
I do. I actually have I got a bunch of stuff actually. I've got a onboarding sheet. I've got a checklist of all the steps that need to be done. Checklists are really important to me because I'm forgetful. So I literally, for every new client, we use it to make sure that we've done all the things. Yeah, I've got that. There's my email. Send me an email and I'll be more than happy to share that with you.
Can you hear me if I ask a question? Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, it's John Torrance. So I didn't know if you're hearing or not. So thanks so much for for all that. I think one purpose for your business, it makes me tired listening to all you have to do to get this done. So that, I guess that leads to a question of what's the biggest reason that they say so many businesses don't succeed in the first year or whatever. And so what's the biggest reason they don't, et cetera, and cash flow or whatever. But so what's the biggest reason? What's the biggest barrier for people who don't go past the 10 episodes? What's the biggest thing that you have to look out for to keep it going?
I think it's something that they're just not passionate about.
You mean the topic?
Yeah, they just don't buy into it. It sounded like a good idea at the time. I met this lady who had a podcast, and she was just hitting episode 11. She said, "I'm getting ready to stop it." And I go, "Why?" She goes, "Well, you know that famous metric that most podcasts don't get past 10. Well, I want to prove wrong. I did 11." Then she quit. So she just doesn't feel strongly enough, I think, about her topic. I'm really interested in helping people sell and grow their businesses. Without sales, you can't have a business. And there's so many different ways to approach this. There's so many different people have different views on it. I'm always excited to meet my guests and to learn from them. My guests have been free coaching for me. They've taught me so much stuff. I'm looking at a shelf of books right now, of free books that authors have given to me on selling. And I've read a lot. I've read large portions of them before interviewing them. I'll take an hour, go through and find stuff that I find interesting. I've been in sales for so long. I know it so well. I know exactly what I'm looking for. And that's been very rewarding. The networking that it has created has been amazing. I know a guy, I got a buddy of mine who does a local podcast in Connecticut. He sells advertising for I think one of those little shopper newspaper things. He started a podcast called Guy Who Knows a Guy. And it's all about somebody who says, "I need a roofer. Do you know a roofer?" And he brings on a roofer on and he interviews him locally. And he'll do plumbers, and he'll do chiropractors, and he'll do dentists, and he'll bring all these people on, and everybody wants to be on his podcast, and he knows everybody. And invariably, the conversation turns to, "Do you ever think about advertising in our little magazine?" And then he just as easily sells an ad. So that's a really good model.
So what's driving that then? The motivation for him? It sounds like he just likes people.
Yes, that's important in sales. Really likes people. Really likes people. But some people are introverts. A lot of podcasters are introverts. It's an opportunity for them they do solo episodes. One of my guests does a solo episode. I kind of ask him questions, and then I get him to rhetorically ask the questions back. And you never even hear my voice. And he's the guy I talked about who does the Airbnb hospitality services. He's a shy person, but he rocks it on the podcast. He gets talking. He's got a flow and a meter to him that's just really amazing.
Of the different types you mentioned, it seems like the interviewing one would be most efficient. But I don't know what seems to work the best of those types you mentioned: the teaching, journaling, interview, or storytelling.
There is no one type. It depends on you. I publish a podcast. One of my clients does a podcast called Winer Vana. He talks about wine drinking. He's like an expert. And he's more than happy to talk about this stuff by himself, because that's really what he wants to do. He wants to help people appreciate wine better, and he can get on and he can just spin stories and spin tales. And that's what works for him. He's had no interest in having guests. All depends.
Patrick, have you ever had a week where you had trouble determining what the content would be, or you kind of had to push yourself a little extra hard to get it to get that week's podcast made?
I'm certain I have. Yeah, I have in the past.
How do you what was the spark that kept you pushing through?
Twice I've wanted to quit. Twice I've almost quit. And I thought, if one more bad thing happens, I'm going to quit. But it didn't. I'm still doing it. Yeah. Now I have a mechanism where I have months of interviews queued up. So I show up on Monday and go, who's next? And like, I'm doing people that I interviewed in February right now. I'm getting ready to go on vacation actually next week. I don't think it's safe to fly. I don't want to breathe the air on the airplanes. So my wife and I we're driving to Portland, Oregon. So in order to do that, I'm queuing up 2 episodes. So I actually have to do 3 episodes this week. I did the one that came out today. I've already done next Tuesdays, and I need to do the Tuesday after. And you can schedule. Libsyn allows you to schedule the system, before it gets published. I publish my podcast on Tuesday mornings at 3 in the morning. I've always done that. I don't know if that's the best idea in the world that I came up with, but that's what I came up with. I like the idea that I get the podcast done and I can move on with the week. Some people say that Thursdays is the best day to consume this stuff. There is some science behind that. Thursday might be a better day, but I do Tuesdays. 3 a.m. is like 8 a.m., 9 a.m. In London. That's how I picked that time. So they get it in the morning, and then by the time the people in the East Coast wake up, it's on the top of their queue, and then the West Coast people, that's what I do.
Is that the outcome of when you decide to publish, where it resides on the queue for people? So when I listen to podcasts, and I use I forget what it's called, the little orange one. I think that's Overcast.
Overcast. Yep.
And so basically once a week, I'll just sort of go through all the ones I subscribe to, which is far too many, but we'll include yours at the next opportunity. And so they're there for me, but I don't know how typical a behavior that is for consumers of podcasts. If they're like me and just let them sort of pile up and then I'll go through the magazine rack, or if they're there and Thursday is when I'm looking for podcasts. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Like, I listen to the Daily every morning these days.
Mm-hmm.
I want to keep on top of, there's been a lot of news.
Yeah.
So I'm overdosing in news. That is bad.
It's
a lot of
dangerous.
podcasts that I used to listen to, I'm not listening to as much. But I have finding as times are changing, I'm going back to a lot of my original podcasts that I like business podcasts. I like tech podcasts, so I'm back listening to those. But it all depends, lots of times on a Saturday, I've got a lot of stuff to do. That's what I'll do. I'll do like you. I'll queue up a whole bunch of them. I'll make sure that they're all there, the ones that I want. And just kind of binge through them, especially if I'm going on a long car ride. I'll do that. I listen to way more podcasts than I probably ought to.
How long a ride is it to Portland?
You're
You're gonna have some time to kill.
It's 28 hours. Yeah. Well, I'm bringing my wife. She's pretty chatty too, so it'll be. Or she's bringing me. When you look at it. Good question.
Thank you.
Is there a difference between a podcast player and a podcast app?
No.
Same thing.
Yeah. In fact, people in podcasting call them pod catchers.
Podcatchers. Okay.
Yep. Catches the podcast.
Does a different app have strength in a different topics, or are they pretty much all the same and reach all the same podcasts?
They mostly have all the podcasts, and it's all a matter of how you like the what the experience of using the podcast app is. Some of these podcast apps are pretty awful, I think. Like the Apple one, I think is really confusing, although I've used it often. I like Stitcher. I like Overcast. But the thing is when you set these podcasts up, that's part of what we do at Habanero Media, is you have to submit these RSS feeds to these companies. Usually what we do is we do Apple first because they're the most stringent. If you can get it to pass Apple, and lots of times it fails. There's things they don't like the art, it's too big, it's too little, it's not good enough, it's not square enough. There's something in the RSS feed's not right. They got lots of issues. Once you get that all right and they accept it, then you start submitting to all the others, and usually it goes pretty smooth. It could take a few days to get everybody on board. Apple got much slower there in March. I think it's because everybody started working from home. Everything got slower. Submittals things that used to take a 1-day turnaround, 2-day turnaround, turned into a week. But
so it isn't like Google where they can you can pay money to be ahead of a search. Do any of them have that kind of a model, business model?
No. I think they're mostly monetize by ads on the app. There used to be a thing that people used to really fight for called new and noteworthy. If you were an up-and-coming podcast, Apple might put you at a higher list if you were to search for a podcast. But that was only for a brief moment of time. And it was only for people who were just starting a new podcast. And then after a while, nobody really believed it really worked. It was kind of like mysterious, just like SEO for Google. Google really doesn't put a playbook out there on how to do search engine optimization. It's all kind of word of mouth, and people run experiments and they kind of see what kind of works. And that's how we know how SEO works. I think the same thing was true back for new and noteworthy. I don't think new and noteworthy really matters. Podcasting's a long game, like any content marketing. It's like any marketing. You just got to keep putting it out there. People have to see it 7, 8, 9 times before it starts to stick in their head. It's just like any other. It's just like if you were writing blogs. That's a good way of thinking of it. Podcasting's the new blogging, and in some regards, it's easier than blogging.
Hey, can I ask you? You mentioned a moment ago that you have to once you create the podcast, you upload it to Apple Podcasts and some of the other things you mentioned. Is that something that you have to do with every episode? You got to keep on hand delivering them. No, you don't do that. Okay.
No.
It's like
no. You submit the RSS feed from the media server to them, and you only need to do that once. And then that media server keeps that RSS feed up to date. So if you put a new episode, if you publish a new episode, the media server updates the RSS feed, which is just like it's like an XML code. It's like raw it's kind of a XML HTML like code, and it just updates that. It just updates that file.
okay.
On the podcatcher side, they periodically run an audit, and they look at all of those and see if it's updated and changed. They probably got a hash file, something. and they look at that and they see, oh, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. Oh, it's changed. What's different? Oh, there's a new episode. Then they update that into their podcast, and then we see it when we pull that podcast up on our app.
Okay. Thank you.
It should be on my video now, right? There we go. Should have done that before. Good questions. I love podcasting. It's been pretty fun. It's been very rewarding. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
You have my email. If you got any questions, you got my phone number.
Got it.
I'm around all week, packing on Friday.
Cool.
But I'll be on my email all the entire 2 weeks. That's
All right.
that's for sure. I still got a business to run. So
Thank you. Safe travels to you and your
Yeah,
wife.
try to enjoy yourself with all that busyness.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate what you've shared today.
absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for jumping on here tonight. Appreciate you guys doing it. Pat, thank you again for helping us out on our Innovation Tuesday. And enjoy your vacation.
I will indeed. Wish I could have been there. Wish I could have visited you all in person. But I like another time.
We'll get back to that in due time, I'm sure.
Yipper.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.